Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the DX11 and DX12 performance in the Battlefield 1 open beta with the AMD RX 480 and the GTX 1060. If you remember about a month ago when they had the closed alpha going on, I was testing the RX 480 and that BF1 PC build that I did here on the channel, and I didn't have the 1060 at that time because it wasn't released yet, and I promised once it did come out, I would go ahead and test the game again. So now that we got the open beta, I can do that for you guys, and we're going to be taking a look at DX11 versus the DX12 performance, because in the last closed alpha, they actually didn't have DX12 at that time, and right now it's still not really entirely perfect. I'm expecting this performance to improve once the game finally does ship and we get the full driver optimization from Nvidia and AMD. For this testing, I was using the latest drivers for both sides. So for AMD, that was 16.8.2, and on the Nvidia side, it was 372.70. We did all of the testing in my main system here with the i7-6800K. That's overclocked to 4.3 gigahertz with 32 gigabytes of RAM, but both of the graphics cards were tested at their stock settings. So let's take a look at the video options we used here so you guys can get an idea of what options I was actually using, and a little bit of a change actually that I noticed in here compared to the last alpha, which I thought was quite intriguing. So right now I'm running at 1440, 144 hertz, but we tested in 1080p and 1440 on both of these cards. And in here I did turn off motion blur and weapon depth of field because they are just two things that I personally don't like, so I just wanted to mention those to you guys really quickly. And then in the advanced options here, you can see I do have running everything at ultra. I had actually restarted the game and changed some options so that I lowered that, but this should be at 50%. So for my testing, I had the resolution scale at 50%, which in this game is actually the previous 100%, and if you put it anything higher than that, you're actually getting a higher resolution, and lower than that, you're getting a lower resolution than whatever your native one is set to. For the rest of the quality settings in here, I do have everything up at the highest that it would go, all the way up in ultra, the ambient occlusion on HBAO, anti-aliasing set to TAA. They do have FXAA high, medium, and then off for the anti-aliasing in here. And this is the one that I actually wanted to mention was a bit odd, because if you remember in previous Battlefield games, they always had an anti-aliasing deferred option, which allowed for MSAA 2 times and 4 times. Now, they had this in the closed alpha just a month ago. I'm showing you guys on the screen right here. They had that option in the closed alpha. But in the open beta, they've gotten rid of the deferred anti-aliasing with the MSAA. Now, I don't know if they're planning to add that in later on in the final release of the game, because I remember during that closed alpha, there were some people that had brought up, Digital Foundry specifically, mentioned that the MSAA option may have not actually been even working or doing anything. So whether or not they're still working on that, or if it's just something they decided to remove from the game entirely, we will have to wait and see until the final game is released. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at our performance numbers here with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. So for the testing here, I decided to run it two ways. I wanted to do a controlled test as well as a live match test, because obviously people usually want to know how it's going to run in a live 64-player match. So for the live match test, I did a 64-player Conquest server where I just basically recorded my FPS averages throughout the course of an entire match. But the controlled test was something that I wanted to do to eliminate any possible variables that could be introduced there. So that just consisted of me loading into the new Sinai Desert map, which was not in the alpha, and just sprinting from one end of the map all the way to the other on a horse, and then back again, just so that we could have a very consistent test to compare side by side versus the live match, where obviously more variables can be introduced there. So starting off with the controlled test on the GTX 1060 at 1440p, we could see that it did pull at an average of 53 FPS versus the 49 FPS of the RX 480. And when we switch that over to DirectX 12, the 1060 maintained the exact same frame rate, while the RX 480 actually saw a drop down to 47 FPS, losing 2 frames there. When we tested at 1080p, we could see both of these cards more than handling the game, maxed out completely, with the 1060 pulling in an average of 81 versus the RX 480's 78 FPS. And when we moved over to DirectX 12, both of these cards lost a little bit of FPS, but actually tied with an average of 77 frames per second. Moving over now to our live match numbers with the 1060 at 1440p, we saw an average of 52 FPS versus the 49 of the RX 480, and in DX12 we did see the GTX 1060 lose a frame, dropping down to 51, while the RX 480 actually got a 3 FPS bump to 52. Now looking at 1080p, once again, these cards more than able to handle themselves in the live matches as well. We see the GTX 1060 pulling in an average of 75 FPS versus the 76 of the RX 480, and then on DX12, the 1060 got an average of 72 versus the RX 480's 78 FPS. So at 1080p, in DirectX 12 in the live testing, the RX 480 got actually a pretty decent victory over the GTX 1060. But my takeaway from this is that both of these cards right now are very close, practically neck and neck, and with the DirectX 12 implementation the way that it is right now from DICE and the lack of any driver optimization from Nvidia and AMD, both of these cards are performing, you know, about the same. We did see the RX 480's numbers actually jump up in DX12 in the live match testing, which was quite interesting, honestly, to see those numbers jump up like they did compared to the 1060, which really didn't get that huge jump up in live matches. I expected to honestly see a massive decrease in FPS in the live match, but obviously it was able to hold up here on my 6800K. If you are on a lower quad-core CPU, you may see some issues there, but I wanted to remove any bottleneck possibility, so that's why I tested on the 6-core processor at 4.3 gigahertz. So let me know your thoughts on these numbers down in the comments below, and once again, before I leave, we just know that this is closed beta. The game is still not out yet. We're going to get more optimization and everything once this is all said and done when we get the final release, and we will do that testing again certainly when the game does come out. But I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys, and I will catch you next time. Ta-ra.